Harry S. Truman, born on May 8, 1884, in the farming community of Lamar, Missouri, was the eldest child of John Anderson Truman and Martha Ellen Young Truman. From a young age, he suffered from poor eyesight, forcing him to wear thick glasses that later became part of his signature look. The family moved frequently as his father sought better land to farm. Though they were not destitute, the Trumans had no luxurious means. Every day demanded hard work. Harry took to reading history, particularly about the great generals and statesmen of yesteryear, Andrew Jackson, Napoleon, Julius Caesar, and fantasized about forging his own path. Yet he was also shy, prone to introspection, and always aware that he lacked the elite educational pedigree of some of his peers. As a teenager, he found solace in the local library, devouring biographies and classics. His mother, known to be a proud, straightforward woman, encouraged him to keep learning. "If you can't go to college," she reportedly told him, "you can still learn from books." Truman graduated from high school in Independence, Missouri. College was financially out of reach, so he toiled on the family farm. In his early 20s, he tried his hand at several odd jobs, bank clerk, mailroom worker, but rarely found success. Yet those experiences shaped him, teaching him humility, perseverance, and an empathy for the underdog that would later define his political persona. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Truman volunteered for the National Guard and was shipped off to France as an artillery officer. This marked a defining chapter in his life. He discovered an aptitude for leadership. Under intense pressure, with artillery shells raining down, he remained calm, organized, and unafraid to make swift decisions. By all accounts, his men grew to admire him as a steady, fair-minded lieutenant who looked out for their needs. That sense of camaraderie stirred in Truman an interest in public service. After the war, he returned to Missouri, opened a men's clothing shop with a friend, a haberdashery in Kansas City, and tried to settle into civilian life. The store went under during the recession of the early 1920s, leaving him mired in debt for over a decade. But in the ashes of that failure, a new opportunity arose. At the urging of Tom Pendergast, the head of the local Democratic political machine, Truman ran for a county judge's position. Despite no formal legal training, he campaigned vigorously, focusing on roads, infrastructure, and fair administration. Against expectations, he won. Over the next several years, he moved up the ranks of local government, eventually securing a U.S. Senate seat in 1934. He was never a particularly charismatic speaker, his voice too high-pitched, his presence unassuming, but he built a reputation for honesty and dogged oversight. His Senate committee investigating war profiteering gained national attention, rooting out corruption in the defense industry and saving the government millions. President Franklin D. Roosevelt took notice, and in 1944, when looking for a new running mate for his fourth term, settled on Truman as a safe choice. Roosevelt won handily, but only 82 days into his new term, he died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Truman, who had been vice president for barely 3 months, was sworn in as the 33rd President of the United States on April 12, 1945. He had not been briefed on numerous top-secret matters, including the Manhattan Project, the clandestine effort to build the atomic bomb. Suddenly, he had to make decisions that would shape the post-war world. Within a month of taking office, Germany surrendered, but the fight against Japan raged on. American firebombing raids had laid waste to Tokyo and other cities. The desperate battles on Iwo Jima and Okinawa signaled that an invasion of the Japanese homeland would be unimaginably costly. Meanwhile, the top scientists at the Manhattan Project tested the first atomic device on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert, codenamed Trinity. The explosion lit up the sky like a false dawn, heralding a new age of warfare. Now came the moral crucible for which Truman is forever remembered. Faced with the prospect of a drawn-out invasion that might kill millions on both sides, and uncertain about whether Japan would surrender, Truman authorized the use of atomic bombs. On August 6th, the bomber Enola Gay dropped Little Boy over Hiroshima. 3 days later, Fat Man fell on Nagasaki. The blast wiped out entire cityscapes, killed tens of thousands instantly, and subjected countless others to radiation poisoning. On August 15th, Japan announced its surrender, bringing World War II to a close. In that moment, the man from Missouri had ended the deadliest conflict in human history, but at an incalculable cost. For most Americans at the time, Truman's decision was lauded as necessary. The press called him a hero who had saved perhaps hundreds of thousands of American lives, and even more Japanese ones, by preventing an invasion. Yet from the start, there were voices of dissent, questioning the morality of unleashing such weapons. Some of the Manhattan Project scientists themselves had urged caution, arguing for a demonstration in an uninhabited area before using the bomb on civilians. The debate about the bomb's necessity rages on. Truman, for his part, remained adamant that he had no regrets. He said publicly that if faced with the same situation again, he would do it the same way. But behind closed doors, diaries and letters reveal a more tormented figure. In one private note, rarely publicized until years later, Truman wrote, "I made the only choice that seemed right at the time. God grant that it was." He wrestled with the theological and moral implications of nuclear warfare. A devout Baptist, he once confided to an advisor that he prayed daily for absolution if he had erred. Yet outwardly, he projected steadfast resolve, convinced that hesitation or regret would weaken America's standing in a post-war world, quickly fracturing into rival blocs. The years following the war tested Truman's resolve. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, consolidated its grip on Eastern Europe, igniting fears of communist expansion. Truman responded with what became known as the Truman Doctrine, pledging American support for nations resisting communist subjugation. He championed the Marshall Plan to rebuild war-torn Europe, hoping that prosperity would immunize countries against totalitarian ideologies. He also pressed for the creation of the United Nations, envisioning a global forum where conflicts could be managed before they erupted into full-scale war. Yet ironically, the seeds of the Cold War, an era of superpower tension that threatened the world with nuclear annihilation, sprouted under his watch. By 1949, the Soviets had tested their own atomic bomb, ending America's nuclear monopoly. That same year, Mao Zedong's communist revolution in China succeeded, further shifting the balance of global power. Then came Korea. In June 1950, North Korean forces invaded the South, setting off a brutal conflict. Truman dispatched American troops under a United Nations banner to repel the invasion, inadvertently starting a chain of events that would lead to a stalemate still visible today across the 38th parallel. Throughout these crises, Truman remained a controversial figure. Many Americans appreciated his forthrightness, his blunt, "give 'em hell, Harry" style. Others saw him as an accidental president who was in over his head, stoking East-West tensions by refusing to compromise with the Soviets. Within his own administration, factions debated how far to press American power. General Douglas MacArthur, revered for his World War II successes and subsequent occupation of Japan, clashed openly with Truman over Korean war strategy. MacArthur wanted to expand the conflict into China, potentially using nuclear weapons to achieve total victory. Truman believed that risking nuclear escalation was madness and insisted on a limited war. In April 1951, he relieved MacArthur of command for insubordination, igniting a political firestorm. Public opinion was fiercely divided. Some saw Truman as a traitor to the cause of victory. Others hailed him for upholding the principle of civilian control over the military. Meanwhile, the domestic landscape also demanded his attention. Truman championed civil rights, desegregating the armed forces by executive order in 1948 and advocating for federal anti-lynching laws, a move that alienated much of the Southern Democratic base. He faced the rise of McCarthyism, where Senator Joseph McCarthy alleged communist infiltration of the government, spurring widespread paranoia. Truman publicly condemned McCarthy's tactics, but the climate of fear persisted. By the time Truman left office in January 1953, his approval ratings at one point sunk to record lows. He had become one of the most polarizing presidents in American history. Yet stepping away from the limelight did not diminish the moral complexities of his legacy. He returned to Independence, Missouri, where he lived modestly, refusing to cash in on his fame with lucrative corporate boards or paid speeches. Friends noted a quiet sorrow in him, though he maintained a cheery public face. 1 year after leaving office, he was invited to a seminar at Columbia University to discuss global affairs. Attendees expected grand pronouncements on foreign policy. Instead, Truman spoke about the scourge of nuclear weapons. "We cannot let them become a normal part of war," he insisted. It was a rare public admission of the unique danger the bomb posed. Still, he did not say he regretted using it in 1945, only that he prayed no one would ever do so again. The controversies surrounding Hiroshima and Nagasaki persist. Many historians argue that Japan was already on the brink of surrender by August 1945, especially with the Soviet Union poised to invade Manchuria. Others point to the mass suicides and extreme defense tactics seen on Saipan and Okinawa, contending that an invasion of the home islands would have been a bloodbath. Some highlight that Truman's administration also used the bombs to send a message to Stalin about American power, launching the nuclear arms race. The moral debate is a labyrinth. Was it a necessary evil, a war crime, or some gray territory in between? Truman seldom wavered publicly, claiming that his conscience was clear, though his private writings suggest a more conflicted internal monologue. For the Japanese survivors known as hibakusha, the devastation was indescribable. Burned skin, torn limbs, bodies vaporized by a searing flash. Radiation sickness claimed victims for years afterward. Entire families were wiped out, cities turned to charred rubble. That such destruction was unleashed by a man often described as mild-mannered, straightforward, and lacking personal malice underscores the haunting truth: war, especially at its highest levels of decision-making, can compress a universe of suffering into a single momentary verdict. Truman's later years saw a slow shift in his public image. After he departed the presidency, the Korean War ended in an uneasy truce, and Dwight D. Eisenhower carried on the Cold War balancing act. Historians began to reassess Truman's achievements: the Marshall Plan, NATO, the formation of the United Nations, and credited him with shaping the post-war order that kept Western Europe free from Soviet domination. He also stands out as the first American president to truly champion civil rights since Reconstruction. By the 1960s, a generation that had grown up under the shadow of the Cuban Missile Crisis looked back on Truman's decisive approach as a stabilizing force. And ironically, as the Vietnam War escalated under Lyndon B. Johnson, some critics yearned for the kind of moral clarity that Truman had, right or wrong. His presidency came to be seen less as an accidental caretaker regime and more as the forging of an American global strategy that persisted for decades. Yet overshadowing all of this is the atomic bomb, the sheer magnitude of the event, unleashing nuclear devastation on civilian populations, ensures that Truman's name remains tied indelibly to the dawn of a fearsome new epoch. Some historians note that he likely caused more immediate, large-scale deaths in a single stroke than any other political leader, though such comparisons can be complicated by dictators or warlords responsible for systematic genocides. Still, the label, the president who killed more people than any other, resonates, especially for those who grapple with the moral horror of nuclear warfare. On a personal level, Truman remained outwardly humble to the end. He had never sought vast wealth or an imperial lifestyle. In his retirement, he enjoyed strolls around Independence, greeting neighbors and visitors. When the senior statesman Winston Churchill came to visit him, they reminisced about the final days of the war, the decisions that carved up the map of post-war Europe. Privately, Truman admitted that he sometimes wondered what Roosevelt would have done if he had lived to see the bomb, but he concluded that the burden fell to him, and "I did what I had to do" was his refrain. What is certain is that Truman's use of atomic bombs ended one war and started another, the Cold War, an arms race that dominated global politics for half a century. By taking that step, he demonstrated both the awesome reach of American power and the moral dilemmas that come with it. His presidency also set the template for U.S. engagement in the post-war world, shaping institutions like NATO, forging alliances in Asia, and launching a policy of containment against Soviet expansion. He proved that a leader who is not a flamboyant speaker or an elite intellectual can still leave an indelible mark on history, for good or ill. Harry S. Truman died on December 26, 1972, at age 88. By then, public opinion had swung toward a more appreciative view of his presidency, though he remained a figure of contention. When news of his death spread, commentary poured in from around the world. Many Europeans hailed him as the protector of their freedom during the early Cold War. Many Japanese, still haunted by the memories of August 1945, expressed complicated feelings. Some continued to condemn him. Others had long accepted that the bombs, however cruel, were part of a war that Japan had initiated. For Americans, he had come to symbolize a brand of leadership guided by direct talk and unwavering duty, even if that duty led to acts that remain morally fraught. In our modern times, we wrestle with how to harness such power responsibly. We see new challenges, cyber warfare, drones, artificial intelligence, emerging as the next frontiers. Truman's experience stands as both a sobering precedent and a cautionary tale. If he were alive today, perhaps he would counsel diligence, moral clarity, and the humility to know that no single human mind can fully grasp the consequences of unleashing advanced weaponry. He would likely remind us that behind every strategic calculation are countless individual lives. Harry S. Truman's story is neither a neat parable of triumph nor a tragedy of unbridled evil. It is a deeply human saga of a man thrust into an unimaginable position, navigating the darkest corridors of war, forging alliances to secure peace, yet burdened forever by the knowledge that he unleashed the atomic age. When we call him the president who killed more people than any other, we are not merely denouncing him. We are acknowledging the stark reality that power, once unleashed, can reorder the human landscape in ways that defy easy moral judgments. But we also remember that Truman's presidency saw the dawn of a new world order, one that, with all its flaws, avoided another global conflict on the scale of World War II. He left behind a blueprint for multilateral institutions, a robust framework for American involvement overseas, and a lingering question about the righteousness of ultimate power. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.